Hello, everyone. Welcome to Avrash's World. Today, we have a special guest, Nick Jonsson, also known as Nick Jonsson. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Araj. Thank you so much for having me.
That's wonderful. So, before we get started, and we're going to talk about your book and many, many interesting topics here. But before we get started, how would you introduce yourself for our audience here, just briefly?
Well, I was born in Sweden and then I studied in Australia. And since then, in 2004, I've been working in various general manager roles in basically in Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam. These days, though, I have changed my life. I left the corporate world and instead I'm running confidential peer groups with business owners and senior executives in Singapore. And I've done that for the last 5 years.
Okay, that's wonderful. So, we want to talk about your book. It's called Executive Loneliness: The Five Pathways to Overcoming Isolation, Stress, Anxiety, and Depression in the Modern Business World. There's a lot of information there. And my first question is, tongue in cheek, execs, they're capable of human emotions?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? And I found myself being asked that when I was seeing a therapist a few years
Yeah.
ago. So that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah. But it's something again that we don't talk about, and I'm really glad that people like you are shedding light on it based on your personal experiences as well, which makes it so much more relevant. So, how would you define executive loneliness, and what are some of the challenges that creep up?
Yeah, so basically, Arash, I myself, if I look back at my career, many times I elbowed my way to the top of the organization. I didn't care so much about my colleagues' well-being. It was more about me getting the promotions, getting the pay rise, pleasing the boss, and getting the work done. And the scary thing is though that when I then left the corporate world and for the last years now, when I've been in all these confidential peer group meetings, listening to the challenges that the senior executives have, I realized that I was not alone. This is how many are doing. And what is then happening is that you isolate yourself. As you do that, it's a lonely journey to the top. And as they say, it's lonely at the top. So that is what I seen. And that's why I wanted to dig deeper. And indeed, the first thing I do was to define executive loneliness, but it's really that it is lonely at the top. And it is exactly that I'm meaning, that you just look so much for yourself. It's so much about the ego that you forget others, and that becomes this lonely place.
Does it become sometimes paranoid because you have this competition, you have people, and you don't want to show any weakness because that's perceived as not a strong thing? And we know now, and there is a lot of research of showing that really to be vulnerable is a sign of strength. But in society, a lot of people don't see it that way. There's still some sort of idea that you have to be tough, right? You have to be, again, for the lack of better words, a man to be able to deal with this situation. Whereas this is not the reality of things.
Absolutely, Arash, and especially when you and I grew up, and our generations, perhaps we're all told boys don't cry, and get over it, and at least that was how it was then. Perhaps it changed now, but when we grew up, that's what it was, and this is still the generation, perhaps, who are the general directors, the managing directors for many of the big companies around the world, and those are the people I'm working with. And most of the people I'm working with are now around 50 to 60 years old, and those are the people that are suffering. They've gone their whole career trying to be the one, biting it together, thinking they have the answers. And I was just one of them, until the wheels fell off, until I crashed, and until I was basically lying, on my bed and having written my will and testament, and I thought it could be all over. Why? Because I kept it all to myself. All the glory, all the celebrations, but also all the pains. And I was just engulfed in this loneliness.
Yeah, and as you say, I think loneliness is the right word. You feel isolated from everyone else. This is mainly based on your own personal experience. What are you comfortable sharing with us here of how you got on this journey? And then we're gonna look at the steps too, and what you recommended as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I can talk on my own journey, but I can also talk about the book. And part of the book was to interview a lot of senior executives, and surveying the executives. I can share all these findings with you and the listeners, and it's quite some remarkable findings in there. So yeah, you can ask me any questions you like. because what I am today, I believe I dare to be vulnerable. I'm completely changed. As you said, Arash, I realize that vulnerability can be a strength, and not only can be, I should say, it is a strength. And I want to spread a message that to any business leader or listeners today, if there's something on your mind, don't share it, because also, as I can share, and as we know, that a problem shared is a problem halved, and that is, that can be life-saving, as we can also cover today.
What was the moment? And we have that, and those are actually very good moments. The moment where you realize like something is wrong and I'm going to do something about it, like actually taking steps. And I know with my health, when my health was not in good shape, I was obese, I was suffering from various ailments. At one point I said, okay, that's it, no more. You think you've hit bottom, but that's actually a good thing, because then you pick yourself up and start walking. What would be your moment? What would you share with us here?
Yeah, so it was basically a slow fall from about 2015 to 2018. So 2015, I was at the peak of my career. I received big bonuses, promotions. I was basically managing medical service companies with 72 hospitals and clinics in Indonesia. But I took a look then at myself. I was also performing really well in sport. Everything was going well. But then I look internally in my family, and I realized that the relationship with my wife was not good. So I thought, well, I should change wife. I can do better than this. So it started by me basically, divorcing my wife. With that, my son moved with her. And it was no fighting about it. It was all smooth, but it was, again, I isolated myself even further by this move. And that was a downward spiral where after a few years I became lonelier at work and lonelier at home. And I needed to find something in my life. And what I found was that going to the bar after work and drinking alcohol was good. Until I also became heavily overweight. I gained about 60 pounds by exchanging sports for alcohol. And what I didn't realize was that, starting with 2 or 3 drinks after work, it could easily turn to a few years later 5 or 6, and then the weekend were big benches. And when I came back into the work, on Mondays, and I jumped from company to company at this time, I was lost. Then I quickly went down, and it was in 2018 then indeed I hit my rock bottom. But it was not by choice. Basically, by this time, alcohol had broken down my body so much that I couldn't exercise anymore, and my heart was rushing. I had, hypertension, and even my left foot was swollen like an elephant foot. It was that big, and I found out later on from a psychologist that it was a psychosomatic illness, because I had done MRIs, I had done blood tests, I have done everything that possibly could, and even x-rays, and no one could find anything wrong with it. No one could understand what it was, but it was just that much anxiety and stress I had inside me. And I just thought that I had to clean up my act, because I thought I was going to die. And that is when I my turn came there, Rush, and the savor was that I, in the end, couldn't just hold the pain anymore. I decided to tell one person, and from that moment, it all switched.
Yeah, that is very important, of being able to open up and talk about that to others, and to reach out, as you say. So you have 5 steps, the 5 pathways. Step 1 is really that kind of realization where you say, okay, something's wrong, and let's be honest. And that's vulnerability and honesty, and like completely honest, not trying to like change things or make ourselves look good, but just like straight up the facts. Things are not looking good. Is that the first step?
Yes, it is. And just like a shop owner takes stock, if it's once a month, once a quarter, once a year, you look over your inventory, right? How often do we do that as human beings? And in this instant, it was about, get a pen and paper out, or a spreadsheet, whatever you prefer, and just write down everything. If you're overweight, you cannot exercise. And this time I had to write down, and I mean, the stigma around this is huge, right? I wrote down addicted to alcohol, and that, just the fact that I wrote that down, that just meant that I admitted it to myself. And that is the first step here. And I also had some relationships broken. Then with my ex-wife, I had, I left some of my companies in not the best shape. So I had a lot of resentments. All of this had to go on that sheet as well and be written down.
And often we're on autopilot and we don't see things and we're blind and we ignore things. There's certain parts like, oh no, I don't want to go there. And just for myself, there was this like kind of fear, anxiety that was in me. I was like, no, I don't want to think about that. I want to do something else. We distract ourselves. We go towards like entertainment or even exercise as an escape sometimes. And we don't realize how things are, what is going on. So I think really important to be almost brutally honest with ourselves, but as a way of like inquiry into it. So then once you've done that, what is the next step?
It was taking that list and thinking, go line by line again and think, okay, I have this problem. Who can I talk to this about? And for example, then the alcohol issue, I had to look up, anonymous association who could help people with alcohol problem. The overweight, I had to go and see a doctor. I was depressed. I needed medication for that doctor. And then, all of those things, it had to be written down who I could get help with. And because I had opened up to one person here, and she actually became my wife at this stage, my new wife, and so she was by my side as we were going over this list, and she helped me with a lot of it. She said, I know someone who can help you with this, that, and we just went over this whole list. And as I did that, I started to get so much hope actually, and suddenly I was back alive.
Yeah, and we feel we have more control than we give ourselves credit for. And what I like about the Serenity Prayer is wonderful is like, knowing the difference between what we can control and what we cannot. And then focusing on that we can, and just build it. It's kind of a snowball effect of like building more and more confidence as we're taking that path.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. So that was indeed asking for help. And then Arash, the third thing then was getting healthy, because I realized that, there was nothing that was more important at this stage than getting my body functioning again, both physically and mentally. And it's very interlinked, as we know. So it was really getting on a path, to sort myself out. And I had to get some nutritionist advice. I got some wearable devices, and I got a coach, basically an overall fitness coach, who helped me set up some small steps by, start walking a couple of miles a day and measuring it, feeling the achievement, and then we stretch it longer and longer, all the way until I could be back into running a half marathon. And stuff like that. So we just put up some goals, and this coach was there to really help me. And it took me 3 months to taper off all the medication the doctors gave me for my depression and anxiety. And after 3 months, I was basically surviving on exercise, healthy food, being surrounded by all these support groups and the people who were also in recovery. So I was in a very good space, perhaps already after 3-4 months, the best space I had already been in my whole life. So I was really getting healthy in 3 months, from thinking it's over to being fully alive. It's amazing, isn't it?
That is amazing. That is actually very fast. And so once you were in that spot, what is the fourth step then?
It was cleaning up all the baggage of the relationships that were broken. And Arash, as you know, in recovery, this is an important step. But how many people who perhaps have not had the gift of desperation to get this journey of clearing up the relationships, because not everyone had the same problem I had to. I say I was fortunate to have the alcohol addiction, because that actually put me on this beautiful recovery path. But for those people who are blessed to not have any addiction problems, they might never come across this otherwise. So that's why I share that with everyone. So if you felt isolated, if you felt lonely and you've fallen into depression, if you ask people, how are all your relationships? What about with your colleagues, your friends, your family? You will uncover that there's things there that they go to bed with, and that is very painful for them. So in my book, therefore, I included as the fourth step to really go back and clean up your baggage, make amends, apologize to the people you can in the past. And then moving forward, as you would know also, Raj, we do this on a day-to-day basis. If we said something we didn't mean to before we go to bed, we try to make it right and sending our apology, and then the next morning calling them and have a good conversation with them, and make sure that we move forward and we don't have any resentments.
I think one of the really first things though is forgiving yourself, of accepting yourself, forgiving yourself. What I did was happened for whatever reason, and just being able to, once you do that, then you are really capable of forgiving others, and it comes from a very authentic place. I think that's also with love. Once you're like, okay, wait, I do love myself and now I can love others. But a lot of us are not in that stage when we go into relationships. We go into probably relationships for the wrong reasons. You're like, okay, I don't want to be lonely. I just want to be with someone. So I think that is really important of knowing where you're coming from. And then what you're building, and I love what you're saying, is like kind of rectifying things. Okay, what I said was wrong. What I did was wrong. This was completely off track and so on, and be okay with that, and expecting the other person to forgive you. But even if they don't, it's really your intention that counts here.
Yes, it's keeping our side of the street clean, and it might sound selfish, but that's what we need to do. We need sleep at night. We can, and again, back to serenity prayer. We cannot control how other people are. It's about controlling our own emotions here.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what it also comes down to is being authentic to our desires, ourselves, and so on. I think that's hugely important too. So let's talk a bit about stigmas that exist, and what are some of the things that we need to fight against and come up against, the stigmas that surround us, again, whether it's about mental health or executives or prejudices and so on. What would you say? What do we have to watch out for?
Well, I think everything we discussed almost today, Araj, has a huge stigma in the society, and we have a long time to go. And that's why I'm so pleased that you're having this conversation with me today, because that's what I want to break. And I can only say that while I was on this beautiful path of recovery in 2018 and what I shared with you today, I was feeling great. But this was in a closed little circle. It was with my new wife in my recovery group, but I was terrified of someone finding out on the outside world what was going on. I still kept it secret. No one really understood that I was really suffering before. They thought I was going out, having a great time. And, I call it in my book a smiling depression. And that's a good summary for me and probably most people, because we are so good at covering up for this. But then what happened, Arash, when I was 1 year into recovery, sadly, a friend and colleague of mine died of suicide. And that's the moment where I decided to do something. I said, we need to break the stigma here. I made a video of me when I just set up a charity campaign called Race to the End of Executive Loneliness. I became a fundraiser and a volunteer for a local organization here, a suicide prevention agency. And then that video clip went viral on LinkedIn. It went all over the world. So within 24 hours, I was completely surrounded by people, because that was the first time I declared to myself my story, and I did it to break the stigma. And I was on live radio the next day, and then came out a 4 pages feature with my whole story exposed in the business press. So there was no turning back, yeah? After that, I'm an open book, yeah?
and that's wonderful, because you have no secrets. And once you realize I have no secrets, you are invincible, because nobody can find out. You say, I wrote a book about it. I talked about it openly. I think, and we don't see that way often. I think that's kind of the stigma that, or the self-censorship that we have of like, no, let's not talk about this. Let's talk about that, or let's change this a bit. And I think good for you of being fully authentic and say, okay, well, this is what happened to me. I'm going to freely and openly talk about it. And now you have nothing against me, because I have nothing to hide. And that is a liberating feeling, to have nothing to hide.
Yes, it is. And I remember when I wrote my first chapter of the book, I kept rewriting it, asking myself, am I completely honest here? And then I kept asking my new coming wife, who was by my side when I hit my rock bottom and stuff. And I asked her to challenge me. Is this exactly? And she kept pushing me, said, no, Nick, you were really on your knees. And that day you tried to stop the alcohol, but you couldn't. And you were screaming of pain and things. So she managed to help me to really express exactly the feeling. And some people who read my first chapter of the book can really understand how, addiction can really hold you in a grip. But that was the point. I wanted to, really get the truth out there. And as you say, there's nothing that anyone can have now on me, because it's all there.
And that is finding your purpose. Would you say that is for you your driving force here? More important than money or prestige or career. Something like that's much more important, right?
Yeah, so the fifth and my last chapter of the book is indeed finding your purpose, because what I realized in my case that was too much of egoism, it was too much about me, and I also found through my surveys and interviews for the book that this was very common for senior executives, that they were too much up themselves, and that had to be changed. And I didn't necessarily get that in the first year of my recovery yet. I understood that was the path, but it had not clicked in. It clicked in the day when I made that video and I decided to tell the world what have happened, and I decided to start this mission to break the stigma surrounding discussing mental health. And that is now my purpose. That's why I'm with you today. And that's why after this, I will go and support at a support meeting here with others who are now in the first days of their recovery. I'm trying to give back every day to help others. And that's my purpose now, to be there for them.
And let's talk about EGN. You're the co-founder of EGN, Executives Global Network.
Yes, so Arash, and this is an organization then who is not necessarily helping people with mental health, but hopefully preventing it, because what we are doing is that we are arranging confidential peer groups, either for executives or business owners, and you are then in a group at your seniority level. What we do then is make sure that there's around 30 to 40 in each group, everyone sign a non-disclosure agreement, there's no competitors, and then the facilitator is there to help make sure that it's everything is properly organized, and you then come into these meetings and it's acting almost like your own advisory board. This should be your safe space where you can discuss the issues you have, the challenges you have, and most of the time it's about people, it's about employees, conflicts, issues they have with a boss, managing upwards, managing the teams and organization structures, merger acquisition challenges. So all these issues, that otherwise they might lie sleepless at home or not knowing how to solve, is what then is facilitated and discussed in the sessions.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm like struggling with to understand in many cases is when we get very successful people who are very ambitious and they are, let's say, super wealthy in many cases, right? There seems to be that this ambition is like it's a lack of something, that they're like constantly driving forward, but they never stop, they never relax, it's like never enough. And that is not a good kind of ambition, although I would recommend people to be ambitious, but find out what is the reason for it. And if you have more a balanced perspective, you would enjoy your time, you would enjoy the money, you would share it with others, you will help your employees, you will give back. But it seems, and you said this quite well, it's like people kind of isolate themselves, but they're also very egocentric and saying, this is just about me and I want more and more and more. Whereas if we change that mindset, we could not only be, everyone would be happier, but so would the person themselves, the executives themselves. Do you find that there's a block there sometimes? It's like we try too much and we don't really connect with the world, basically.
Absolutely, Arash. I call most of the executives in the book, I call it anxious overachievers.
I
And
like
looking
that.
at, yeah,
I like that.
and
Yeah.
looking at myself, and again, it's very rare you get someone to admit that, but that's what I saw, and that's what I saw in myself, Arash. When I studied in high school when I was younger, I couldn't even finish high school with all the subjects and the grades. I had to come back as an adult, as a 20-year-old, to finish my high school grades. I did that, and I managed to pass then all the subjects, 21 years old. And I realized maybe I have a second chance here. And again, it was not by choice. It was forced to me. I worked as a construction worker. I had a motorcycle accident. And with that, my career working with my body was over. And I was told by the doctor I have to go back to school and get another job. So I did that. But then I thought, oh, this is good. I can study. I can become something. I started to get some hope from this. So I went into university, and that was my second chance in life. I was quite insecure about myself, but I realized, I got the taste for winning. I managed to top most of my classes at university. I managed to get scholarship, and getting all these recognitions just pampered me and blew my ego up bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what I brought with me in the workplace. Here's this little little insecure person who didn't even finish high school, who's now in university, getting all these grades, all this recognition, having, you know, a champagne with a vice chancellor and photos taken when he's getting the award, flying your parents over from Sweden to Australia to be there for the ceremony, you know, so everything I was lacking as a child and growing in high school, I got here at university, and I wanted more of this. It becomes addicted. I became addicted to it, and I brought this into the workplace. So that's how I was leading, and I wanted to keep going, being that recognized sort of hero leader, if you say.
And I love that you use the word addicted to it, because addiction is not just about drugs and alcohol and then shopping. It's really like goes much more deeper than that. And we can be addicted to fame. We could be addicted to money, and a lot of people are. And we see a lot of comedians are actually suffering from unhappiness, from loneliness, and that's why they turn to comedy. So it seems that the underlying motive is really important. And one of the things that I encourage people is like, look at it. Why is it you want this? Why is it you want to have a lot of money or fame and so on? What's the driving force? And is it really what you want? Or is it just like covering up something?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I'm quite happy living a simple life, Arash. It's not That's not the driver, you know.
Yeah.
I don't have on my bucket list to buy a big house because I find it just a lot of work and a lot of headaches that comes with it. I don't have on my bucket list an expensive sports car. I want to live a pretty simple life. So that's not my driver, or wasn't my driver to getting the career. So what was it? Well, it was obviously how I feel and getting that sort of recognition and feeling good about myself. But was it real? Not really.
Yeah, exactly. So what are the symptoms we should watch out for? I mean, you mentioned various things here, but for our listeners here and viewers, when should they kind of hear like the alarm bell going on and saying like, okay, wait, there might be something wrong? Because we go, most of our life is on autopilot, but what are some symptoms to watch out for?
Well, I think, you know, if we start to isolate ourselves and we wake up at night not feeling good about things, that's probably some alarm bell for ourselves. So, you know, if sleep is a good indicator if things are good, right? Then if we gain weight like you and I did, put on fat, then that's an alarm bell. Perhaps also if someone losing a lot of fat. But if we want to look out for our friends, family, or partners, you know, if we see that someone who loves to do something suddenly stops. So in my case, I was doing frequently exercise, suddenly I stopped it, and I changed that to going to the bar and drink alcohol instead. That's obviously a pattern that I've changed. If, for example, a mother is losing the interest in parenting a young baby or child, then you know that maybe something is wrong. If you have had a pattern or maybe the habit in a relationship that every Wednesday night for many years you cook pasta together, suddenly your partner doesn't want to do that and just isolate themselves. Those are all alarm bells when we need to, you know, try to break this pattern and ideally have a talk with perhaps a coach, a mentor, some counselor, or calling one of all these beautiful hotlines or anonymous organizations which are packed with volunteers like myself and many others who are there to help.
And the good thing is we are changing our perspective on these things. And I think one of the reasons is also the pandemic, because we're forced to be on our own and trying to survive. And it's just like people are more open to talk about it, even if it's on social media, of like being open to like, okay, things are not fine. I'm not feeling well. And just for our audience here, if I stop podcasting at any point for a long period of time, be worried because that is something I love doing. And I think that's really important too. It's like, what is it you really enjoy? Not going to the job because you want to get money, but do you really enjoy what you're doing? And if you could get a job that pays you less and makes you happier, go for it. That's my tip, you know, my career advice, if you like.
Yes, no, I completely agree with you. We need to do what make us happy, and we need to look for that and ask ourselves. But sometimes it's not so easy to do that ourselves. So it's good to have this conversation. Yeah, and I mention it again. Perhaps a coach, a mentor, a sponsor, or someone. And you know, we are just so scared to ask for help. And I write about this in my book as well. That we need to practice this. We are surrounded by people who love us, who will love to help us, and all we have to do is ask.
And often, I mean, when you open up, others will respond. We assume they wouldn't, but they do. And as you're saying, if you're an executive and say, look, I'm lonely, to another executive, they're like, guess what? I feel the same way. And there's like this immediate bond that you would share but you will miss out if you don't do it. And they will miss out too. So it's like that first step becomes so important in anything, whether it's also dating. If you don't go up and talk to the person, you don't know how they feel about you, right? But in a way, that connection, I think, puts us more together and helps you help each other both ways, I think.
Yes, and it's the fear of rejection here, right?
Yeah,
We're so scared that they will reject us, and we need to just practice that and not take it personal and formulate it in a way that that we don't get hurt from it.
Yeah, wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing, Nick Jonsson. You're an author, executive mental health advocate, leadership keynote speaker, and you do know a lot about leadership, what makes true leadership, not what some people perceive. And again, your book is Executive Loneliness, the 5 Pathways to Overcoming Isolation, Stress, Anxiety, and Depression in the Modern Business World. Thank you so much for being on Arash's World, Nick Jonsson.
Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure.